Good morning to you all, and welcome to the 9th lecture of the 2019 Palliative Care Lecture Series. Hospice New Zealand would like to thank and acknowledge Cancer Research Trust New Zealand for their generous support and funding to deliver these free lectures. The lecture today will be recorded and it will be available on the Hospice New Zealand website. We would now like to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Tess Moeke-Maxwell. Tess is a founding member of the TRE Palliative Care and End of Life Research Group. Since completing her postdoctoral studies in 2012, her research interests continue to focus on Māori whānau perspectives of end of life care. Please go ahead.
Ko te aroha o te runga rawa, no runga raro, wai ngai. Te aroha, te whakapono, me te rangi Māori e tātou e. He honore, he kororia, ma ngā rongo ki te whenua, whakaro pai e. Ki ngā tangata katoa, ake, āmene. Te atua, te piringa, tōku oranga. Kia ora koutou. Ko ngaitai ki tamaki makaurau, raua ko Ngāti Parau oku iwi, ko Ngāti Pākehā toku iwi hoki. I am from Ngaitai iwi of the Tainui Confederation and Ngāti Parau on my mother's side. My father was a fourth generation Irish New Zealander. Tēnā koe Hospice New Zealand, tēnā koe Cancer Trust Research Centre, tēnā koutou, to the organisers of the Palliative Care Lecture Series. Thank you for your kind invitation to present today. As Principal Investigator of the Paeherenga study, I am privileged to be guided by Māori kaumātua who advise the TRI Palliative Care and the End of Life Research Group at the University of Auckland. The work we undertake is concerned with improving end-of-life care of older people, including Māori kaumātua. And featured in this photograph are some of my Paeherenga research team members, including academics, kaumātua, and community research collaborators. Unfortunately, Professor Linda Nikora, Dr. Keri Ratima, Susan Reid, and a few others are missing, and including the kuia Marilyn Farid from Wanganui. I also want to acknowledge Tōtara Hospice in South Auckland. They are very kindly hosting me today. So before I move any further, I just want to acknowledge the wharea that we're in, the whenua that we're on, which is Ngaitai, which is Tainui, and the beautiful whānau that have gathered here to tautoko and to listen to this presentation today. And of course, I want to greet you all. I want to mihi to you all and to acknowledge the work that you all do. And those tupuna that you bring with you, he mihi nui ki a koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I also want to acknowledge three special hospices who have been involved with their kaumātua in the Paeherenga study and who have been assisting and supporting me for a number of years to lead out this project. I want to pay tribute to Hospice Mid-Northland and Arana and Hannah Munro, to their CE up there, and also to the clinical nurse manager who has been so helpful, Jenny. Kia ora. Also want to mention the Cranford Hospice in Hastings, particularly one of their former kaumātua, Francis Depoe, Anita Rarere and Katie Durbin. And in Wellington, Mary Potter Hospice, and in particular Ria Earp for her support in the early months of this work before she left, and currently Vanessa Aldridge, who is a marvellous support, and her rōpū. Also, although we have not been involved with hospice in Wanganui, I want to mihi to that hospice because the rongoa rōpū, or the group of people with rongoa expertise under the, korowai of Marilyn Vareed, have had a lot to do with the hospice in that area. And now I'll begin. We all know that Māori kaumātua are living longer, although not as long as their non-Māori peers, and they often have complex comorbidities, including cancer, at end of life. Structurally, our elders are among the nation's most vulnerable. Te Paiheringa is a qualitative study that seeks to give voice to Indigenous families, healers and health professionals with the end-of-life care space about their care traditions. In this presentation, I share some initial findings about these cultural traditions, and I highlight how health and palliative care services help or hinder families to carry out their customs. And by way of introduction, some of you I know and some I hope to know soon, but by way of introduction, I just want to give you a little bit more information about myself. So on the left of this photograph is a tupuna of mine, Tara Te Irirangi. So those of you that visit Auckland, you might see Irirangi Drive. This is named after the paramount chief of Ngāti Tai, currently known as Ngai Tai, and his daughter next to him, Nunu. And Nunu married Thomas Maxwell, a sailor from Scotland, many years ago. We're talking about in the 1800s, of course. And they had a very handsome-looking son, Patariki. I think he actually had blue eyes, this tupuna of mine. He's my great-grandfather. And this is his wife next to him, Hera Maurahu no Ngāti Parau. So it's just a little bit of my whakapapa, so you might know a little bit of where I come from. I want to also acknowledge our community research collaborators. I've already mentioned them. And really, importantly, the participants who have given so generously of their time to be interviewed, and also those that have participated in digital story workshops, the Te Arai Palliative Care and End-of-Life Research Groups, Kaumātua, Kahui, and also our funder. The New Zealand Health Research Council gave us $1.2 million to conduct this study, so we feel very fortunate about that. And I work with a film crew from the University of Auckland, and I'm pretty sure I can say confidently that they're among the best. They have won awards for their documentary and filmmaking. So the aims of the Paiheringa study are to investigate the traditional end-of-life care customs that Māori whānau draw on to strengthen the end-of-life caregiving activities and to support palliative care provision. And within this, we're also very interested in looking at those things that help or hinder whānau to be able to access and utilise their customs within different healthcare settings. So that might be home, residential care facility, hospice or hospital. And the aim is to develop a free online educational resource. Now, the Te Arai elders are concerned that many Māori families have been unable to retain their traditional end-of-life care customs due to the ongoing forces of colonialism. And they called for a study to gather this information about customs, as we are facing, as you know, an anticipated 48% increase in older Māori deaths over the next 30 years. And we're also mindful that health and palliative care services provide acute care only. It is families who provide the bulk of end-of-life care. And today many of our whānau are smaller in number, and often they live at some distance from their elders. Many of our whānau are globally diasporic. We also want to provide cultural information to support palliative care services to better care for our Indigenous peoples. And these services have been informed by Western values and practices and are largely driven by a biomedical model of care. And at this point, I want to pause and stop and thank Hospice New Zealand for providing a letter of support, which I believe really gave some weight to our application for this project. And one of the commitments that, if I'm permitted to mention Mary Schumacher's name, that Mary Schumacher included in that letter was that Hospice New Zealand would be very happy to embed the findings of the Paiheringa study and the resources within their training and policies and structures moving forward. So I think we're on a win-win situation. So in this study, we've tried to use qualitative methods and as much as possible, kaupapa Māori research methods. We are currently undertaking a thematic analysis. There are 4 sites, Mid-North Hastings, Wellington and Whanganui, although the Wellington and Whanganui are a combined site in that we have, on the advice of Vanessa Eldridge, we have drawn on the expertise, the rongoa expertise of one particular whānau in Whanganui to help buffer and drill down upon some of the rongoa aspects of healing. The goal was to undertake 60 kānohi ki te kānoi, or face-to-face interviews with whānau, rongoa, or Indigenous, Māori Indigenous healers, 15 tohunga or spiritual practitioners, and 15 Māori palliative care and health providers. And as I mentioned, we had 3 digital storytelling workshops, and we produced 16 digital stories. Digital stories is a very, very powerful method to convey, I guess, a Māori perspective or a Māori voice on end-of-life beliefs, values, customs. And we piloted the digital storytelling method, myself, my colleague Dr. Lisa Williams, Professor Merrin Gott, and our Te Arai Kaumātua. We piloted the digital storytelling method that grew out of Berkeley, California, out of that university, and we adapted it to be user-friendly for Māori. So when we talk about digital stories, and unfortunately today I won't be able to show you any because the stories are embargoed until the project is launched next July, I am mandated by our kaumātua to be able to take these stories and to show them, but I couldn't, unfortunately, send stories to you all today because they're not available to the public yet. So I do apologise about that. But at this point, I can say if you visit YouTube, Palliative Care TV, and you search for School of Nursing, you will find 8 stories that we created in the pilot. And these are Māori end-of-life stories. So if you're interested in things like Māori health literacy, some of the customs, the values, you'll find some different stories there. One of the things I just want to tell you about, just to give you a bit of a background in terms of our methods, we added a pōwhiri and a poroporo aki, or a closing ceremony, to the digital story workshop, because actually this is a 3-day workshop where participants sit in a computer lab or in a controlled environment with computers and software. So we don't appreciate that really when we watch these 3-minute digital stories. They're personalised accounts of aspects of people's life experiences that they want to share, and we don't really understand the methodology behind them, but it is very intensive. And this is why we need a team of about 7 people to work with our whānau, and then the research team is there as well to support them. But we found that bringing forward a pōwhiri, allowing people to share their personal narrative, each person takes 20 to 30 minutes to share their story, we found this was a very good way of creating a sense of safety in that wairua, or that spiritual sense, bringing in that cultural korowai, and also at the end of that period of time, bringing that kaupapa back to the marae so people can share their stories together and cry together and just be together. Living in New Zealand, I'm pretty sure most of us are familiar with this Māori worldview, and I'd like to just set a couple of things in place before I move forward. This is a very broad Māori perspective. The end of life is a precious time, and whānau draw on their spiritual values, cultural processes and healing customs before, during and after death to manaaki, they're ill and dying. And the transition of the wairua and the wairua transitioning well is critical. Now, this is not something that I've just dreamed up. Wendy Dougalby and others, including Rod McLeod, I was involved as well. I think about maybe 5 years ago, a metasynthesis study was done on palliative care Indigenous research, and the findings showed that the preparation of the spirit to transition at end of life was one of the key elements or commonalities amongst all Indigenous people. Another point I want to raise is that tapu provides an Indigenous ethical care framework to understand Māori end-of-life care customs, and the concept and the practice of tapu informs traditional care. And these customs may differ slightly, iwi to iwi, whānau to whānau, but there are shared values. Professor Ngāhuia Te Aukatoku says that tapu is about maintaining balance, and it's about keeping people safe. It's about protecting each other and the ensuing generations. And tapu is exercised or sustained because Māori consciously decide to believe in it, and it persists because it works. Tapu is about survival, and it is about resilience. For the purposes of this presentation, I define deathscapes as the spaces and places within hospitals, hospices, or residential care facilities where end-of-life care takes place before, during, and immediately following death. Applying a geographical understanding of the deathscape to the Māori experience is very useful, as it opens up a space to rethink place of death as being more than a physical space, a container where care is administered and people die. Drawing on ideas about place as a dynamic and contested process, which is always becoming, provides an opportunity to think about the places where people spend their last days or moments within multiple and complex layers of interconnected social interactions. New Zealand's Western health institutions, philosophies, values and practices have arrived from somewhere else. Arguably for Māori, the deathscape is a potentially conflicted and discursively contested biomedical spatial site. How does the spatial context of dying within a non-Māori home deathscape influence Indigenous whānau experiences of caring for a dying family member? And can Māori repurpose the biomedical space to accommodate their cultural customs? I'm referring to David Crouch's work there. And now I will share some initial findings from the Paeherenga study to show that the death space is relational, negotiated, and at times conflicted. The purpose of our cultural customs is to care for the ill and dying until they cross the arai, or the veil. Whānau are the kaitiaki, or the guardians, who protect the person from harm. And sometimes, as our research findings are showing, sometimes this protection is also from the health system and from health professionals. There are many kaitiaki roles, and kaumātua often lead wairua or spiritual care, and healers give rongoa healing. And this can involve use of plant medicines or general rongoa, like massage, for example. It is important to have modulating and calming energy, a gentle modi in the room, and the modi is the energy life force inside each living thing. And spiritual healing takes place in the care setting itself, but also it can take place at a distance. You're probably aware that food is not allowed in the room as death approaches in many cases. Don't forget, I'm talking about a traditional perspective. I'm very aware of diversity, and we do have lots of examples of diversity, but I'm specifically speaking about the traditional perspective at the moment. And it is common to whakawātia, or to spiritually clear a room after death. And this clearing ritual involves the bed and equipment and anything connected with the space being cleared. And whakawātia allows the energy to settle inside the deathscape. And some hospices leave the room uninhabited for 24 hours to let the energy rest before allowing someone else to use it. And these are very good tikanga customs. It is common for people who have been in contact with death to have access to water, to whakanoa, to cleanse themselves. So whakanoa, again, it's a cleansing, energy healing ritual to remove the tapu associated with death. So now I'm going to just talk about some of the initial findings. In our study, we refer to whānau who provide care as whānau manaki, meaning families who provide care, protection and guardianship over the ill and dying person. And in this context, family includes extended family, friends and neighbours, and anyone who energetically moves into the space with the family. And I'm making a point here that our findings are showing us that this is spiritual as much as it is physical. So we have conducted 61 interviews across the 4 sites, and we use an open-ended questionnaire sheet to do so. The other thing I want to mention is that not all our participants have received their summary stories or their kōrero pūrākau back from us yet, but many people have, probably about 40 participants have so far. They do take a long time, but just to let you know how we got to this first level analysis, if you like, that you're hearing about, we take a person's digital story, we take their digital recording, it gets transcribed, and then we craft a narrative out of it. So we start building upon the themes in that story. So generally it will look like a biographical piece that we start with, and then we'll start looking at specific subject areas that people talk about. They might be talking about their own health. We interviewed, within that whānau cohort, we interviewed a number of people who themselves had a life-limiting illness, and I remember 3 women in particular that asked to be interviewed on their own, and they wanted to tell their own story about their end of life. And I just want to meet them. They have passed on now, and they just did a tremendous job of wanting to share what they had to tell. So we craft these narratives for people, and then they can read them, they can amend them, and they can alter them or delete things. This is a very important document because what it means is that we call it a member checking technique, if you like. What it means is that the participant has some assurity that we have understood what they wanted to convey, and that when we use quotations or when we publish things that they've said, we know that it's bona fide, it has been approved. And I can tell you now that there is a lot of research that goes on where people get interviewed and they never see one word of what they've said and they never get to comment upon it. So this is what is informing this level of analysis, and very soon we'll be going into coding the summary reports. Okay, so let's talk about our whānau participants. We interviewed 17 families, including those with a life-limiting illness, 13 spiritual practitioners, 12 rongoa healers, and 19 health professionals. But the point that I want to raise is that Māori, like everyone else, don't fit neatly into boxes. And so we would often go and interview a whānau person and then find out that actually they were a rongoa practitioner or a Māori health professional that was also a rongoa practitioner, or a whānau member that was also a tohunga or a matikite or a person that worked in that wairua space. So a lot of overlap. Next one. I just wanted to show you a slide, and this slide here was taken from all of the summary reports, or the kōrero pūrākau from the Site 1, which was Mid-Northland, and this particular software from InVivo grabs hold of 50 of the most dominant words that appear, and if you have a look, I think you'll agree with me that most of those words, the biggest words, are the ones most often used. This is actually about people, isn't it? It's relational. This is all about families. And what I can tell you is, in the last day, we've been able to do the word clouds for the Hastings area. And guess what? They're identical. And I'm guessing that when we get down to Wellington, even though that was a very diverse community, and Whanganui, I'm guessing it's also going to be the same. They're pretty much exactly the same. But this is very good evidence to show that what our whānau, Māori whānau in Aotearoa, in these sites we've been to, are talking about are relationships. They're not talking about syringe drives and medication. A fundamental value underpinning our care customs is whanaungatanga, and this is about families having a strong relationship, a sense of well-being, connected and working together to provide a sense of belonging. So, for example, gathering and being together 24/7 to administer care customs as death draws close is particularly important. So just at a quick glance, you're probably quite familiar with a lot of these things. Karakia is still number one. This is something probably every single person talked about as being critical to the traditional care that whānau provide. Rongoa, there are many, many forms of rongoa that whānau are using, including rongoa rākau, which is the plant medicines. And for Māori, when we talk about the end of life care, we don't just talk about leading up to the time the person takes their last breath and the roro, or the brain, stops working. We're actually talking too about the post-death care of the tūpāpaku and also the wairua, the spirit of that person. It's very essential that things are correct, things are calm and peaceful, so the spirit can transition well. And we're also talking about post-death care in terms of tangihana and rituals around kawemata, those memorial and respectful services that we undertake. And of course, bereavement care. As kaitiaki, or guardians of the ill and dying, families oversee and administer spiritual care of the entire family. And the Indigenous language, our Māori language, prayers, both traditional and Christian, the role of spiritual and plant medicine healers, these all contribute to the enactment of care customs across the illness trajectory during death and beyond. Yes, and I guess I just want to say that there are diverse beliefs and customs. We interviewed people who were very, very staunch with their own mātauranga, their own knowledge handed down by their tūpuna, and there were people who were very, very staunch with their Christianity as well. And there were people who were very, very eclectic, who wanted to take the best from many cultures. They would do anything to bring that sense of well-being to themselves. So, for example, one beautiful woman I interviewed, she was using different crystals for healing. She was using pink rose quartz crystals. And when I thought about it, I thought to myself, well, the pounamu that many of us treasure, that is the kōiwi, those are the bones of Papatūānuku. And actually, the rose quartz is also the kōiwi, or the bones of Papatūānuku. It's exactly the same. It may be from a different place, but it's still from Papatūānuku. And also this particular woman used pranic healing as well. Well, at that time I didn't really understand what pranic healing was, but I believe it is a form of energy healing. And so in her rongoa kite, if I could say it that way, in her basket with all her healing modalities, she had a number of things from other places, other countries. So these are some of the forms of rongoa. I know it's a little bit hard to read. It's very small, but I can just perhaps read out a few. In terms of what brought comfort, what eased the wairua, what eased the hinengaro or the emotions, what comforted the tinana, because often that comes last after everything else. Often the tinana is a symptom of everything else. We have te reo Māori, the Māori language. We have the whenua, the land. I've mentioned karakia, karanga, the traditional calling, whai kōrero, the speech making. And this whakakata, the humour, and kai, food, and the beverages is so important in terms of rongoa. Haka, waiata, the singing, kani dancing, taniko, the weaving, embroidering. Rongoa rākau, we'll talk about that a bit more, I think, in a minute. And the practice of using the skills of matikititanga. So this is the scanning and assessment of people who are mawiwi, who are unwell, and being able to see through the physicality of the body to see problematic areas of illness, even cancer, and being able to talk to tūpuna to bring some comfort to that ill person. And also we've got miri, and what else have we got there? We've got the crystals, and also hui. Hui are considered a rongoa, very, very healing, to be able to kōrero, to prepare and plan to resolve problems and to negotiate issues that might come up at the end of life. So now we can talk a little bit about rongoa rākau. So many families have access to rongoa rākau, the plant medicines and the healers, and the ill person is comforted by a range of Indigenous treatments. Rongoa rākau reportedly is used to support symptom management and to provide comfort, and sometimes not just of that ill person, but of the whānau. And so these are just some of the different things we've recorded: salves, inhalations, infusions, ingestions, steam treatments, and poultices. I will talk more about this a bit later. One thing I can say is that not all Māori whānau had access to their rongoa healers. And, you know, some of us are familiar with the 1907 Tohunga Suppression Act, when many of our tohunga and healers weren't allowed to practice anymore. And, you know, this was to try to combat the decimation of our population. We had many of our tupuna had died by then from the flu and other illnesses that had been a product or byproduct of colonialism. And this was one way that they thought that our whānau might be able to turn to the Western medicines to get healing and flourish. However, there are many whānau that will say that they never listened to that Tohunga Suppression Act. They just took their healers underground. And we can certainly see that today in our project. We have evidence where there are whānau that are very, very strong. Kaumātua that were interviewed, that one person, their life was saved twice, according to them, when they were a child. And they were trained in rongoa, and now they provide rongoa healing, and they are a kaumātua. So you can see in some families this was the case. But unfortunately, for many families, they have lost their traditional healers. And when they were asked, and I want to mihi to Donna Kerridge, who came with me to Heretaunga to do some of the rongoa interviews. And Donna is a spokesperson for the Rongoa Association of New Zealand. When people were asked if you had an option to access rongoa, would you use it? Everyone said yes. And the problem seems to be, who do I go to? What would I use? And what cost would there be to it? A fundamental value that informs the way families care is manaakitanga, and I think in New Zealand this is a familiar word to us. Manaakitanga, I guess the general translation is kindness, generosity and support. To manaaki is to provide the care that uplifts the Māori, this vital energy life force of the dying person and the whānau before, during and following death. And good end-of-life care was provided by both non-Indigenous and Indigenous health professionals and services. And I really want to stress that, because we have had stories of poor care as well, and you will hear about those soon. But I want to stress that when people got it, when they got that Māori whānau want holistic care, and when they walked alongside and supported whānau in this, whānau were very satisfied. And at that point, the health professional became a member of that whānau. So they too became part of the whānau manaaki circle, if I can say it that way. So health services and health professionals played an important role by joining the whānau to carry out end-of-life care. And it's all about being present, compassionate, and assisting where possible, assisting and not obstructing. So I'd like to, first of all, talk about some of the things that staff did, the system and staff did to help. Now, I'm only going to draw on two people from 61 people interviewed, because we have a wealth of information, and I just wanted to give you a sample at this point. And don't forget, the project will be finished and a website will be launched end of July next year. We will be disseminating back to communities in August, September, and then it will be available for you all to use and share. So I'm going to quote a Māori male chaplain, and this is his perspective of how the health system and staff helped his whānau. He said the hospice itself ensured where they could that they had 2 rooms for people to gather in and open for people to bring kai in, and they knew that people would be coming in all hours of the night. Now, I think the defining point for me was that the strain and stress didn't show on the staff, and they were, well, they're right into manaaki. There was a smile. They knew what was going on, and they knew that there was family tension. So they helped facilitate times in and out for different families to be together. And family had some private times and had some sort of shared open times. And they were able to facilitate that with the other whānau members. And we were able to have karakia and do all those sorts of things. And that's where I think the hospice at that stage did a really good job in ensuring that everyone was cared for, and everyone, in terms of manaakitanga, that was all kept intact. That was good. And I'm drawing on this male Māori chaplain again to talk a little bit more about his experience of a system and health professionals that were able to provide good resources and good medical care. And he says, I'm reminded a few years ago, my brother, who's a year and a day younger than me, passed on. And one of the things that I remember quite distinctly was the fact that the resources he was able to attain, because he was actually given the choice by the specialist when he was in hospital, either to pass in hospital or whether he'd like to go home. Well, most Māori will always say, I want to go home. And in doing that, there were two people that, well, they'd redone his whole thing, his whole bathroom into a walk-in shower. They'd got the latest hospital bed into the sitting room, and it was all those types of things that really contributed to his passing. Plus the specialist came and mihi'd to the whānau. Beautiful. And he let all the whānau know where he was at and what was happening. And then the specialist, his last words, I remember, is that I'm here to make his transition painless and seamless as possible. And for me, that's, it's beautiful. And this is the specialist. And I think he had a love for Māori culture, and he knew how everyone was feeling, all the family was feeling. But to have him come in, and he changed his medication because we could see the pain that my brother was going through. So there's just a couple of beautiful examples about staff systems and staff working with whānau. And we have many of those examples. However, when health services or health professionals prevented whānau from carrying out their care customs, this was considered unhelpful. It led to mistrust and it prolonged grief. And one of the most important things that families need is space to gather and to perform their care customs and death rituals. And when this is obstructed, it is not only difficult for families, but also for Māori and non-Māori staff who support them. And I'm going to talk now about spatial discrimination and personalised racism. A Māori nurse described comments she heard regularly from her non-Indigenous colleagues about Māori whānau using the family room. So we all know this is the space where families can come and sleep over. And the nurse says, yeah, I come across a barrier of no space. My colleagues say, oh, that whānau's here again. Oh, I knew that was going to happen. I knew they'd want the family room. And then the white person comes in. Immediately it's like they say to that family, oh, we have all this stuff. We have the family room. We have this. We have that. Anytime, yes, you can have the room tonight, no problem. We'll get those lazy boys into your room. Or we'll put you in this big room. I know there's only 3 of you, but that will be fine. And then other Māori whānau will be like, oh, they're going to want the room. Oh, they're going to want. Oh, they're going to need. The tolerance for it is getting shorter and shorter. Like, I can see that whole thing happening in one day. That escalation of intolerance happens in one day. So I think there's a lot in that, isn't there? And there's a lot that we can learn about, I think, from that. And I think if we had more understanding about what happens within that dying space and why we need to gather and why we need to use water to whakawātia and whakanoa, I think we might start to get somewhere. Participants also told us about health professionals who did not support Māori using their plant medicines, highlighting a lack of information about how Māori rongoa rākau interact with Western pharmacology and cancer treatments. In this quote, the family are asking for the Māori nurse to go outside while they use their rongoa rākau, and her role is to put a do not disturb sign on the door and to make sure no one comes in. So I'm actually going to read what she says. So the nurse is saying, the patient or the whānau say, could you just go out for a minute because we're going to do this? And I'll be, okay. And they ask, can you make sure no one comes in? And I put a sign up on the door. Because they don't want to be interrupted or asked, what the hell are you putting that on for? Or whatever. And some nurses will say, oh, that might interfere with their aspirin. Or that might interfere with whatever. But at the end of life, I think, what the fuck? Just give it to them. The doctor goes, oh, hold. The doctor goes, oh, hold off on that in case it interferes with your medication. Just wait until they leave, I guess, before using their rongoa. Or sometimes they won't. One guy, he was like, oh, no, I don't want to rub that on him because we were told not to give them anything because that kawa will interfere with their medication. And the nurse goes on to say, it's just like a massage on their leg. The point I want to make here is that, by and large, the narratives that we've read, that we've heard and we've read and that we're working with, point to the fact that generally if it's something that's applied to the outside of the skin, like a punny or a salve, staff seem to be relatively okay with it. But if it's something that people need to swallow or ingest, like a kawa tea or something like that, there seems to be a different problem for people, health professionals. So I think some final points based on these initial findings are, first of all, we need to increase the Māori palliative care workforce. And I haven't gone into this in depth, but I want to just say that we have had so many amazing stories about Māori health professionals in hospitals and in hospices and in residential care facilities that go the extra mile to care for whānau and to ensure that they can enact their traditional care customs at the end of life. Now, we know that hospitals and hospices and residential care facilities all have tikanga policies, but actually, are they being operationalised? Are people up to date with their local Māori knowledge? Do they have even a smattering of te reo? Can they actually pronounce Māori vowels? Is that hospice or hospital or residential care facility a place where Māori can walk in there and see their values reflected, see their tupuna, their landscapes reflected? And I would argue in a lot of cases that's not happening. And what we're finding is that the research data is showing us that Māori health professionals are buffering a heck of a lot to protect whānau. And often it's protection from the very people that work in these organisations. People who, I would argue, would have cultural ignorance. And I like the term cultural ignorance because it actually shows us that there's a chance to not be ignorant, that we can actually go and get educated, we can get ourselves informed, and we can become part of that whānau manaaki korowai. We've all got the potential for that. I think having access to information and resources, we know about that. We've got evidence to say that we need more of that. We need to boost statutory support. I haven't spoken about that today, but I have talked a little bit about this clash between rongoa rākau and Western pharmacology, particularly cancer treatments, and so I think we need more research on the combined use of rongoa rākau and those treatments. And definitely I think we need dedicated palliative care cultural safety training. And I think there is a lot of work to be done to bring the Western health settings up to speed to be bicultural, because that's actually what's needed. And when we do that, then we can extend it to other groups. We can extend it to the Pacific peoples. We can extend it to our Chinese whānau, our Indian whānau. This is not about saying Māori need a larger piece of the pie or want a larger piece of the pie. Actually, it's just about looking after people. But at the moment, the values and the practices are very geared towards a Western ideology and a Western practice and a biomedical focus. And I think we have enough evidence in the study to say actually our whānau want more. And they are going under the radar with what they're doing. And they are even withholding information and at times lying about what they're doing because they do not feel safe in these particular Western environments. I'm not saying all of them, and as you know, I've really stressed the point. We've had beautiful feedback from evidence from the data we've gathered about systems that work well and health professionals that are onto it. But we have had a lot of information, and some of it I haven't put in here, where it's appalling, to be frank, and we need to do something about it. And so I've put in there whare manaki, Indigenous end-of-life care homes informed by tikanga and kawa. I don't know why we don't have some of these. We need them, and it's not to replace the existing hospices or specialist palliative care and what they're doing, but it's to say, hey, look, we need our own spaces, and we have our own ways of doing things, and we don't want to feel whakamā or embarrassed or ashamed about what we do. We want the freedom to do it, and we want support to do it. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and listen to this presentation, and I really look forward to bringing you the digital stories to your communities in person, or next year you can access them publicly. Tēnā koutou katoa.
This concludes today's call. On behalf of Hospice New Zealand and the registered sites, we would like to thank Tess for sharing her time and knowledge with us this morning. Thank you everyone for listening today. We hope you have found the lecture interesting and informative. Have a lovely day.